Hello everyone, Diamond Miner Studios here, and it's time for yet another video game review. And before you ask, I'll address the elephant in the room. It's finally in HD now! It's about goddamn time! Holy shit, he's actually in the modern era and not in 2007. Yeah, I'm aware it took me forever to finally make the switch, but better late than never. Oh yeah, and my voice actually sounds normal because I got a better mic.
About goddamn time, isn't that right?
Anyways, last time I dished out a well-deserved thrashing to the Crash Bandicoot trilogy and explained why they're easily some of the worst games I've ever played. Playing those atrocious games again made me yearn for something actually good again. So why not get back to reviewing things I like? I was planning on covering some licensed games, you know, The Simpsons Hit and Run and SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom, but I'd rather save those reviews for later. I was working on the Hit and Run review, and honestly I wasn't really feeling the motivation to continue, which is a sign I should hold off on that one for a little bit. Instead then, I'd rather look at a series I'm even more passionate about than those already awesome licensed games. I want to finally give the review treatment to my favorite franchise, Super Mario. Now, I'm sure this series needs no introduction. Mario is as recognizable as Mickey Mouse. Hell, a study at one point showed that more kids recognize Mario than Mickey, so that tells you all you need to know. So, to be quick, Mario gets introduced in the popular arcade game Donkey Kong. The video game industry experiences a major financial crash in 1983. 2 years later, the Nintendo Famicom is released in the United States as the Nintendo Entertainment System. Super Mario Bros. Is one of the games that releases on it and becomes a smash hit. Mario goes on to have many more games and become synonymous with video games in general, and the rest is history. There's really not much development history to cover here. Shigeru Miyamoto, Mario creator and director of the game, actually wanted to have shooter elements in the game at one point, but this was later scrapped. Could you imagine if that had gone through though? Mario may very well have been an FPS series these days. Anyways, he also wanted to add a dinosaur companion for Mario to ride, but hardware limitations prevented it from being fully realized. This idea would later be used for Yoshi in Super Mario World. And that's it. Yeah, I told you there wasn't that much. This franchise has been one of, if not my absolute favorite, ever since I started playing video games at a young age. It all started when my family got a Wii, where I would play New Super Mario Bros. Wii with the Galaxy games, Super Mario 64, and of course, the subject of today's review, Super Mario Bros. Truthfully, I think the original Super Mario Bros. Was actually my first exposure to retro games. You know, I only had an Xbox 360, PS3, Wii, and DS, and I owned some PS2 and original Xbox games, but that was really it. It was through my parents' purchase of Super Mario Bros. On Wii that introduced me to the games they played growing up, and I was amazed seeing this and knowing my parents had played it when they were my age. In the coming months, I would also get Mario 2, Lost Levels, Mario 3, and Mario World. Of course, I sucked at the games because I was a stupid kid, and I spent more time with Super Mario 64 instead. I wouldn't end up beating the 2D games until a few years ago when I started collecting old-ass video games, an experience that would remind me why they became the instant classics that they are.
Well, for most of them anyway.
I also played the Land games for the very first time, both of which I also quite liked. There's a reason why Mario would go on to become one of the most iconic game franchises of all time, and why it remains my favorite series to this very day. So of course, now that I've started making game reviews of my new capture setup, there's nothing holding me back from finally giving this awesome franchise the review treatment and explaining why it's the one game series that stands tall above all others for me. Before I begin though, I want to make something very clear. I won't be covering every single game with Mario in it. There's hundreds of said games and it would take eons to cover all of them. I wanted to focus on mainline platformers only, both 2D and 3D, so no sports spin-offs or Captain Toad or anything like that. Because if I did cover all of them, I'd be talking about fucking Mario's game gallery. Do you really want me to talk about that? Yeah, I thought so. I'm also not going to review Yoshi's Island. Well, yes, it's technically a Mario game since it has Mario characters, and it's also titled Super Mario World 2. I consider it a spin-off in the start of the Yoshi sub-series. If I ever do reviews of the Yoshi games, sure, but I'd rather keep my attention to the mainline Mario games. So with that said, let's kick the Mario Marathon off by talking about the very first game in the mainline series, Super Mario Bros. As the man himself says, "Let's go!" That's so goddamn terrible. Alright, let's get this started. Let's begin with the plot. Since this is an NES title, and a very early one at that, the actual game doesn't have any cutscenes of any kind to explain the story, so you have to look in the manual. Thankfully, I have a complete in-box copy of the game that an anonymous family member graciously gave to me, so I can do just that. Side note, I'm super glad to own this since I played on the Duck Hunt combo cartridge for the longest time, so it's cool to finally have this. Anyways, you can find the story explanation on the second page of this instruction booklet. The story begins one day in the peaceful Mushroom Kingdom, a monarchy inhabited by mushroom people known as Toads. A tribe of reptiles called the Koopa, who were infamous for their use of black magic, invaded the kingdom September campaign style and turned all of the mushroom people into objects such as stones, bricks, and even horse hair plants, whatever the hell those are. The only person capable of reversing the black magic is the daughter of the kingdom's monarch, Princess Peach, or Toadstool as she was called at this time in the West. But I'm referring to her as Peach because it's a much nicer name than Princess Frog Shit. However, the princess is currently in the hands of the evil king of the Koopa, Bowser, although he's not officially called that until Super Mario Bros. But
I'll shut up.
This allows him to essentially take over the kingdom unopposed. Meanwhile, Mario and his brother Luigi are minding their own business, probably fixing pipes or some shit, when they hear about what's unfolding in the local Mushroom Kingdom. With a desire to help out, the two brothers hightail it to the kingdom through a warp pipe. Once they arrive there, they see how far the kingdom has fallen into dismay, and set out on a quest to save the princess and reverse the black magic of the Koopa. And that's the plot of Super Mario Bros. To be honest, it's a lot more in-depth and a lot darker than I would have expected. Given this series, you might imagine that it would be some silly plot about Bowser stealing the princess and Mario having to stop him, but no. This story involves black magic and innocent people getting turned into inanimate objects against their will on top of that. Obviously, it's not overly violent or anything because it's a kid's game, but there are some dark implications to this story. I mean, imagine you're minding your own business and suddenly you get turned into a brick and can't move or defend yourself. That's a scary thought. However, since this is an NES game, it's still not the most thought-provokingly deep story. It still does boil down to the Save Princess Peach from Bowser plotline that would become the standard in pretty much every Mario game from this point on, even though it does have some darker elements, like the thing about the toads getting turned into bricks. Ugh. You also wouldn't know any of this if you didn't have the manual, and since complete-in-box copies of the game with the original instruction booklet are, frankly, fucking ridiculously priced, I don't know if anybody outside of die-hard collectors would even know there's a story beyond the simple Save the Princess.
Well, they do offer the manual online, though, so, maybe that's how.
This story does do the job of providing context for what's happening just fine, but the plotline itself is nothing special, which isn't a problem, since most NES plots aren't anything particularly great to begin with. Alright, it's time to talk about the graphics, and I'm probably going to get some backlash for saying this, but I don't care. I don't think Super Mario Bros. On NES looks very good at all. Stop booing me, please. I get that the NES was extremely limited when it came to color and memory, and by that standard, it doesn't look horrendous, but the visuals really haven't stood the test of time very well. Obviously, the colors are somewhat limited, as expected, but the sprites don't look detailed at all and there's not much variety to the locations you visit. Levels are either above ground, underground, underwater, on mushroom platforms, or in a castle, and nothing else. Additionally, the frame rate tends to slow down when there's a lot on screen, and the visuals themselves are very unstable, often having distracting visual glitches. Again, I understand that the NES was a very limited system when it came to graphics and memory, so expecting top-of-the-line visuals is very unrealistic, especially since it was an early release game, but the graphics of Mario 1 are still not very appealing in retrospect. Next up, the soundtrack. This is probably one of the most iconic collections of video game music, and for good reason. The melodies are incredibly well composed and very memorable, which has helped them stand the test of time wonderfully. These tracks would be used throughout the rest of the Mario franchise, even to this day, and the overworld theme is still considered the de facto theme song for the series as a whole, appearing in countless games and other media. With that said, though, I'd still rank this as one of the overall weaker Mario soundtracks. Don't get me wrong, I like the music fine enough, but it kinda has that early NES sound to it. It's hard to explain, but if you were to compare the music from Mario 1 to later NES releases, there's a very distinct difference. The track selection is also quite limited, but this is most likely because of memory limitations again. In spite of all this, I still do quite like the soundtrack of Mario 1, although I prefer the SNES renditions from Super Mario All-Stars by a little bit. With all of that out of the way, it's finally time to talk about the gameplay. Super Mario Bros. Was pretty much the first platforming game to break away from the arcade formula, where each level was one screen and the goal was simply to get a high score, and give a much more fleshed out experience. It was the first game that I know of to include smooth scrolling, and it changes the objective from surviving as long as possible to get a high score, to completing a set amount of stages. As such, this was quite the revolutionary game when it was first released. It managed to break sales records and made the NES and Mario household names. However, coming back to it nowadays, it's definitely still a good game, but it's showing its age in several areas. Because of this, it's an entry I don't find myself revisiting nearly as often as many future games in the series. In spite of breaking away from the arcade formula, Super Mario Bros. Is still remarkably simple in concept. It's probably what comes up when most people hear the term video game. All you have to do is run to the right and jump whenever you need to, hit the flagpole at the end of the stage and move on to the next. This is incredibly basic stuff, so I don't really have to get into immense detail. You all know what kind of series Mario is, so it's not necessary. Every platformer worth its salt should have good controls in physics, so how does Super Mario Bros. Handle this? Well, it's functional, but certainly not perfect. Mario's acceleration isn't too fast or too slow, and the jumping is easy to get a hang of. Sometimes the jump timing can be a little bit picky, but this is also incredibly infrequent, and thus I can get over it. The actual handling itself is perfectly fine, but the physics feel a little bit clunky compared to future entries. Mario's jumping is somewhat heavy, so it can be very tricky to make long jumps. The mid-air control is also rather limited in comparison to some other platformers, so correcting errors can be quite tricky as well. This means that the game doesn't feel as smooth as later games, but since this was pretty much the first platformer ever, I can get over it. It doesn't take that long to get used to the more iffy control, and once you do, the game handles perfectly fine. Another thing a platformer must nail is the level design. You can have great controls, but if the levels you use these controls in aren't any good, then you've got a bad game on your hands. Thankfully, Super Mario Bros. Passes this test. The stages feature polished platforming challenges that are designed well around the control scheme you're given, for the most part, and are decently enjoyable to play. The only world out of all of them I'm not a fan of is the 7th, which has annoying enemy placement, but other than that, Mario 1 is well designed. However, they are rather basic by the standards of the series. If you think of the word platformer, this is probably the kind of thing that would immediately come to mind. Most of them are rather straight shots to the end and don't contain nearly as many secrets and hidden rooms with things like coins or power-ups as future entries. It does have the warp zones, which allow you to skip to later worlds, but that's about it. Some level layouts, particularly the castles, are also recycled, just with some added obstacles to make them harder later on. It's a fairly cut and dry, straightforward experience, and that's not a bad thing. If anything, Mario 1 serves as a great foundation for future Mario games. It's well designed in its own right, but it's rather basic, and future games expand on the formula considerably. My biggest criticism of Mario 1, though, is probably the difficulty balancing. I'm not saying the game is too hard or whatever, because it really isn't that hard, even without the warp zones. There's just a few small things that kind of grind my gears. For one, the game doesn't have continues, and the chances to get extra lives are extremely limited. Now, to be fair, this was also true in most other NES games, and Mario 1 is much better designed than the heap of shovelware crap that poisoned the library of this otherwise good console, so the fact it doesn't have continues is far more forgivable. It doesn't mean it isn't a flaw, however, since I'm still not a fan of when games send you back to square one for getting a game over, and like I said, the extra lives are fairly hard to come by in Mario 1. There is one thing that sort of fixes this, though. If you get a game over, you can hold A as you push start on the title screen to restart from the world you got a game over on. If you know about this code, then the game pretty much has unlimited continues, more or less. Some people might consider this cheating, but I personally don't for a few reasons. First, the developers intentionally programmed this into the game, and it's an incredibly simple button combination. You don't have to use a Game Genie to be able to do this, and like I said, all you have to do is hold A and push start. Second, this isn't a level select cheat code. All it does is restart the game from the world you were on, and it doesn't allow you to skip further into the game than you were. And finally, doing this doesn't start you from the exact level you died on, but rather the first level in the world. I consider this a fair punishment, since you'll still have to redo a portion of the game for getting a game over, but you won't have to redo the whole thing. I'm not saying you have to agree, and if you think I'm a cheater for using this, then that's fine. I personally would rather take this over having to restart the game every time, thank you very much. Even with the limited lives, this continue code is good enough for me. A much bigger complaint I have in this regard, then, is the power-up system. You probably know where I'm going with this. The power-ups function as a sort of health bar. Grabbing a mushroom makes Mario grow big, which gives you an extra hit. If you find another block with a mushroom in it, you'll get a fire flower instead, which allows you to shoot fireballs that kill enemies. Hell, the fire flower is also the only way to kill Bowser without having to make a risky move over or under him. As such, you want to get this power-up as much as you can. The issue, then, is how the hit point system itself is handled. Unlike future games, where getting hit with a second level power-up only reverts you back to Big Mario, getting hit with a fire flower in Mario 1 makes you shrink all the way back to Small Mario, meaning you'll have to track down another mushroom so you can get a fire flower, praying to God the whole time you can outlast the enemies long enough so you don't lose the mushroom. These things are also surprisingly rare, and there's only about 3 in each level, if that. Sometimes there's not even any. Because of this, you want to avoid getting hit as much as possible, but this is especially hard when Lakitus or Hammer Brothers are involved. These enemies are capable of throwing projectiles at you and are incredibly hard to kill without a fire flower. It can be really annoying to finally get your hands on a fire flower, only to lose it almost immediately to an enemy or falling into a bottomless pit. This becomes especially irritating in the later levels, which feature incredibly tricky patterns combined with tons of bullet bill cannons. I can still enjoy Mario 1 in spite of this, but I really wish that it was ironed out, because it's a real pain in the ass to get the fire flower back if you lose it. And to be honest, that's really all I have to say about Mario 1. Yeah, that really didn't take that long, but Mario 1 doesn't really demand a 40+ minute review on it. While it is showing its age in many areas, including the graphics, physics, and certain aspects of the difficulty balancing, the game's other aspects more than make up for it. Mario's controls are functional if you get used to them, the level design is good if a bit basic, the fire flower is a lot of fun to use, and the music is quite catchy. It's not a mind-blowing gaming experience, and almost every future game improves on it in some way, but it successfully sets up the series for many years to come and serves as a fantastic foundation for later expansion. All the pieces are there, it just needed some more games that would take that foundation and expand on it and further flesh it out. Thankfully, that's exactly what would happen. eventually. Yes, truth be told, the series wasn't about to advance immediately. It would be several years until the next true step was taken. No. Instead, Nintendo decided that it wanted to drag Mario through the mud for the next few years and lost the ability to even match the bar of quality that this first game set. A shame to be sure, but that's how history is. And that's it. Finally, a short Diamond Miner Studios review. I didn't think I had it in me, but here we are. Anyways, the next few reviews shouldn't be particularly long either, since I still have several more 2D games to cover. So next time we'll be looking at the awkward period the series went through between Mario 1 and Mario 3, where a follow-up that even matched the level of quality set by the first game seemed like an impossibility. So join me for the next video on the Mario Marathon as I look at Super Mario Bros. 2, both the Japanese version called Lost Levels in the West, and the English version, which wasn't even originally a Mario game. This has been Diamond Miner Studios, and I'll see you in the next review. Have a good one.